present a range of perspectives. For more information, check out the PSU's Facebook page, and be sure to come back here next Thursday to attend the great debate on the future of the Republican Party. Ideas is an acronym that stands for Improving Dreams, Equality, Access, and Success. It is a club and a community which aims to promote and encourage the education of immigrant students by providing social and academic resources, and also by advocating for an accessible environment of university education for all. In the media, politics, and everyday conversation, many label their fellow human beings as illegal and continue to believe that undocumented immigrants are freeloaders who don't pay taxes. Hardworking and self-sacrificing parents are forcibly separated from their families. This perpetuates an attitude that is hostile and alienating to those affected by this in the U.S. However, many have come to support the millions of people affected through different forms of advocacy. Today, we consider how this issue could not only affect the person that sleeps just next door to you here at Pomona College, but also that there are people taking a stand. There are ways to take a stand, and we're going to look at how your skills in art, engineering, writing, or a plethora of other areas are powerful use to this movement. Tonight, we're joined by Fabiana Rodriguez and a member of our own community, Paola Reyes. Fabiana is a transnational and interdisciplinary artist and cultural organizer born and raised in Oakland, California to Peruvian immigrants. Named in 2008 by Utna magazine as one of the country's leading visionary artists, Fabiana is renowned for her artwork dealing with social issues such as war, immigration, patriarchy, and globalization. She has also been widely acclaimed for her leadership in establishing innovative institutions that engage new audiences in the arts. Her work has been exhibited across the world, from San Francisco to Rome to Tokyo. When Fabiana is not making art, she is directing Culture Strike, a national arts organization that engages artists, writers, and performers in migrant rights. In 2009, she co-founded Presente.org, a national online organizing network dedicated to the political empowerment of Latino communities. Paola Reyes is a freshman at Pomona College from Hawthorne, California. She's an undocumented immigrant born in Misco, Guatemala. She loves making banana and Nutella sandwiches in the dining hall and is a proud member of the Harvard Money sponsor group. Please join me in welcoming Harvard West. Please join me in welcoming both of tonight's speakers. Fabiana will discuss her passion and inspiration as an artist in activism. We will follow the talk with a formal Q&A time, and afterwards Fabiana will be selling some of her artwork in the back. The posters are $10 each. I would also like to extend an invitation to all to join us upstairs in room 2, in SCC 217 for student-led discussion with the Ideas Club with Fabiana to continue the conversation we're starting here tonight. And now, please give a warm welcome to Paola Reyes.
Can you hear me? Undocumented, unapologetic, unafraid. A commonly used slogan amongst undocumented youth, these three words are very powerful. For me, they each have a very special meaning. Undocumented. I was born in this little town called Misco in Guatemala. Life there was good. I remember having pet chickens, going to my favorite water park, learning how to ride my bike on the dirt road that ran in front of my house. My dad had a good job at the airport, which allowed us to come to the United States almost every summer. I have pictures of my family and me in Disneyland and all these other cool places. We were just tourists. The summer of 2002, that changed. My parents brought my siblings and me here, as usual, but though I did not know it at the time, we were here to stay. My family migrated to the United States that year. We did not cross the desert and enter the United States illegally, like many people assume all immigrants do. No, we came here on tourist visas, and to put it simply, we overstayed our visit. I am not brave enough to ask my parents why this happened, but they could not fix our immigration status. My guess is that we just didn't have the money for it. It didn't matter though, not at first. I went to school like everybody else, made friends, performed well on tests, did homework, the whole ordeal. This continued through all of my years of school. My status became an obstacle my freshman year of high school when I was offered an internship. I needed a social security number, which I quickly learned I did not have. It was frustrating, disheartening, whichever word you want to use, to know that a simple number could, in a sense, ban me from doing things. And while my status deprived me of an internship opportunity, many other undocumented immigrants, including family members, struggle to do other things like get a license or have a job. Later on in my life, I would learn that my status would also make it hard to pay for college. Thankfully, Pomona was very kind to me. After the frustration that came with being unable to accept the internship offer, I became disappointed in myself, believing that I had done something wrong by following my parents to this country. I felt I had let someone, maybe my high school counselor or my peers, down. Unapologetic. But I was quickly told not to be apologetic. I could not be blamed for following my parents to this country. They could not be blamed for wanting a better life for their 3 kids. My high school counselor then assured me that she was still very proud of me, for I was doing well in school and she could see that I was going to end up somewhere great, doing great things. But to this day, I struggle with not apologizing. I often find myself wondering why I get the privilege of being in a college when it puts the people that I love at risk. I know that every trip my dad makes out here to pick me up or drop me off puts him at risk of being arrested for driving without a license, which puts him at risk of being sent back to Guatemala. My mom's status forces her to work cleaning houses, getting paid close to nothing, so that she can put food on the table, and I'm over here going to a school that takes half of her annual income. I've apologized to my mom for being what I consider a burden in her life, and she kindly tells me to shut up, that I'm being crazy, and that while the struggle is rough, it's worth it. I guess she's a very proud Mama Satan. Unafraid. I used to be very afraid for myself, my siblings, my parents, and even some friends that I knew were also undocumented. Thankfully, my siblings and I have received temporary protection, meaning we cannot be deported for 2 years, which is probably why I'm up here stating that yes, I am undocumented, but I refuse to be apologetic and I refuse to be afraid. Yeah, I still fear for my parents, but I know that prayer is a powerful thing which will keep them safe. My mom was very encouraging when I told her I'd be up here sharing my story, which helped get rid of some of the fear I had of being up here and being open about my status. Other undocumented students on Pomona's campus were also very supportive, assuring me that my story was one worth telling. It was even more encouraging to have friends who are not undocumented and thus don't have to deal with the struggle, and yet they are supportive. They're often called allies, but to me they're like little angels. I know I don't fit the common description of an undocumented immigrant. I'm not Mexican, and I didn't have to tread through the desert to get here. But nevertheless, I identify with people who do have to go through that, and I admire them, for I know that journey must be hell. But that goes to show how diverse the undocumented community is. When activists fight for us, they fight for all of us. So a special thank you to them, because I know the fight is an ongoing one, and even though deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA, the program that gave me and some other undocumented youth protected status and a work permit, there are millions of others who remain on the sidelines, waiting for something to change. This is what I fight for. This is what Ideas fights for. It's what our speaker tonight fights for. And with that, I'd like to introduce the very talented Fabiana Rodriguez.
That was a beautiful sharing, and I'm actually going to talk a lot about what students like you and just undocumented students around the country really created a really pivotal moment. I'm going to stand up. I just have too much energy, so I got to just stand up while I talk. So first, I wanted to encourage everyone that while I'm talking, feel free to tweet out. You know, it's important to get this conversation out of this room and into the blogosphere, into the webosphere, so you can Twitter me or Instagram me, and I'll retweet you. So I just wanted to start with my story. I was born in Oakland. My family migrated to the United States from Peru, and those are my beautiful parents. And when I was 8 years old, something happened, which is that the then President Reagan legalized 3 million people in what was called IRCA. Now this was in 1986, and I say this because we have not had any kind of immigration reform in a quarter of a century, since 1986. And this Republican president was, I think, one of the worst presidents of all time. I mean, Reagan, completely in denial that AIDS existed. He cut the public services program. He was sending military into all of Central America, and yet he was the president that legalized 3 million people. Today there are 11.5 million estimated folks without papers, who are undocumented. And just to highlight that, how could it be that it's been 25 years and we have not had any kind of reform? And also, often when we hear reform, we hear, well, let's blame those Republicans. Let's make this a partisan issue. In reality, immigration is not a partisan issue. The last time we had reform, again, was through a Republican president. So we have to move away from this belief that somehow this is a Democratic or Republican issue. This is an issue, this is a humanitarian crisis, it's a human rights issue, and it fundamentally reflects that the capitalist model that prioritizes profits is not prioritizing people. And it's not just in the United States. Europe, Africa, countries around, continents around the world are dealing with migration. And they're dealing with it because people no longer can survive in their country of origin. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how we can begin to really understand where the problem is coming from, why it affects all of us, why fundamentally this is an issue of structural racism. It's an issue of what is happening with the increasing wealth gap, and also just an issue of the fact that humans have the right to move, and that at the end of the day, it requires an immense amount of courage and resilience to have to leave your home country, like many of our parents did. In 1994, something else happened. Who remembers what Clinton signed in 94? Changed the entire NAFTA. Okay? NAFTA. If you ever wonder why we are in the down economic times we're in, it's because the brilliant politicians somehow imagined that if you opened the free trade borders, that we would have this, this promise that they called free trade that would somehow make things better. In reality, free trade made things worse. But what the president at the time, Clinton, was saying is that there will be no borders for commerce. There will be no borders for the free market. And yet that same year, they started building the militarized wall and the San Diego and El Paso borders. So just think about that, because prior to that, we did not have the wall we have now. And so you had this rhetoric around this promise of the globalized world. Well, in reality, what happened is that the largest companies in the United States said, forget these American workers. We're going to go exploit workers, women especially in Mexico. We're going to go work where there's child labor, where we don't have to care about the environment, where the EPA is not breathing down our neck. And you essentially had cities like Detroit completely collapse. So this was a Democrat. That same year, 94, here in California, you had one of the worst anti-immigrant governors of all time. Who remembers his name? Pete Wilson. Okay? Now, let's not underestimate what Pete Wilson did, because we are still feeling the effects, and this is the 90s. So Pete Wilson introduced one of the worst anti-immigrant state-based laws of all time. Now, prior to that, a state had never taken on immigration, because immigration is a federal issue. But Pete Wilson began to say, these illegals, they're coming, they're invading us, and we have to do something about it. He was the first governor to actually, where he said, we as a state are going to do something about it. And now today, that's normal. I mean, you see what Jan Brewer's doing in Arizona. But Pete Wilson also began a cultural war on migrants. And if you really study the images that he would show men mostly running across and hopping a fence, being in the back seats of cars, and he would show it over and over. He would say, these are murderers, these are rapists, they're going to come steal your jobs. And he began to popularize the word illegal. As an artist, this really interests me, because when we think about what we call unconscious bias, which is that when you look at something over and over again, you begin to develop a way of thinking. And if you're constantly looking at immigrants through the lens of criminality, then at some point you're going to see them as criminals. In reality, you know who the real criminals are? They're the corporations who completely had a disregard for workers and for people, and they forced people to migrate. Because the things that happened is that, like never before, all of a sudden you began to have Walmart and Home Depot in Mexico, and the economic infrastructure began to collapse. So it's no wonder that you have people migrating. It's because of the greed of many American companies. And so why do I care about this as an artist? Because we really have to understand where ideas come from. I'll give you an example. Why is it in our society that you could have the killing of Trayvon Martin, the killing of Oscar Grant, Justin Davis, and you have a system that prioritizes white life, complete disregard for black life? Why? It's because we have been surrounded by such institutional racism that the killing of young black men has become normalized in our imagination to the point where the political system and the judicial system is reflecting those values. And it's the same thing with immigration. You have now such an anti-migrant culture embedded in people's imagination that these politicians are getting away with doing some criminal acts against humanity. I mean, you know, they're holding families in detention centers. They're holding people much more than they should be. They're profiteering. Latinos are now the fastest growing prison population, largely because of migrants. And these are the same prisons that are incarcerating young black men. Can somebody pass me my water in my bag, please? It's in one of those pockets. So this is one of my earliest pieces. Thank you. I get so excited, I just like start joking on my So this is one of my earliest pieces, and for me, art was a way to have a voice, because I grew up in the era of anti-immigrant sentiment, and I remember, you know, I was like 14 years old, and I would be like, why do these people hate my family so much? Because I'm in a mixed status family, and I would be like, this is crazy, like they are perpetuating these lies. And meanwhile, I saw my parents each have 3 jobs. I mean, I hardly even saw my parents because they were always working, because they had to work cleaning houses, they had to work answering phones at night, doing newspaper routes, and I hardly saw them. And the only thing that I saw was their hard work, and that they were doing everything they could so that we could be safe. And yet, on TV, what was being said of them was so hateful. This was the time when Proposition 187 got approved in this country, because voters in California approved 187, even though later it was overturned in the courts. And so in this piece, it's a reflection where on the left I'm wearing white and on the right I'm wearing black. Now, when I was growing up, I realized how invisible I was as a woman of color, and what surrounded me was whiteness. And whiteness in the sense where, to this day, actually, where I look on billboards, I look on film, and where I go to theater, I watch, you know, looking at the magazines, and what's always on the cover is an image of a very thin white woman. Do you see women of color, black women, Asian women, Latinas being portrayed in very strong, prominent roles? No, hardly. And yet, we are no longer a minority. Like, the United States does not look like what you see on TV or what you see on film. And so for me, art was a way to have a voice and to say I exist, I'm present, and I'm also not a stereotype. At the same time, I was surrounded with another kind of whiteness, which is the whiteness that my family was very Catholic, and you know, they migrated from Peru, and they would say, oh, you know, you can't go out unless you go out with your brother. You better not even think about being with a boy. You have to keep your legs closed. You gotta, you know, be a virgin until you find the right person and you get married. And I was like, what? Like, what is this? It's just, I was, you know, I was an American kid, so, you know, number one thing you're gonna do is start rebelling and start, you know, being, it's funny because although our immigrant parents have worked so hard, they're also they're like this. They're like, you know, they're like, we'll keep you right here. You know, they were very strict. And my family also never talked about the fact that we were the descendants of African slaves. You know that slavery happened, majority of slavery happened in South America, okay? And people forget that. Latinos forget that we have black blood in our families, and we completely don't talk about it. We don't talk about being indigenous, we don't talk about being black, My grandmother was black, and yet we never acknowledged that we were Afro-Peruvians. And so I had to really dig that out of my family and really empower myself by saying, I'm a strong Afro-Peruvian, I'm a strong woman of color, and I'm going to put out positive representations of ourselves, because we're surrounded in a culture that labels us criminals, that destroys our families, and that makes it so that it's okay to incarcerate us and to pass unjust laws against us. This is another one of my pieces inspired very much by Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, who said, the artist must elect to fight for slavery or for peace. And that's really a decision that I think every artist has, is that we ultimately have the power to create stories. Now, either we're going to continue creating stories where we're in the colonized mind, enslaved by the things that we were taught, or we're going to be free. And my intention with my art is to figure out how we can be free, how we can get beyond the bounds of what we're learning every day. Another one of my pieces. So let's talk a little bit about how I think about why is art important in activism? Why is art important specifically in the fight for immigrant rights? So on the left you have the space of action, and on the right you have the space of ideas. So right now, a majority white male Congress, majority white male, okay, there's hardly any women in Congress, I don't know if you've noticed that, but there is a majority white male Congress that is making decisions about things that will affect you every day. Your student debt rate, the fact whether or not you're going to have access to birth control, whether or not you're going to have access to mammograms if you're a woman, your right to an abortion, whether or not your family's going to get deported, all that is being decided on every day. And so we have to be engaged in the political system. You have to know who your congressmen are, who your senators are, because they are the ones who hold the power. Now, in the space of action is where every day there's new laws being passed. Did you know that there's a woman in the Senate, Elizabeth Warren, who is saying, why should students pay a higher interest rate than the big banks? And she's advocating for you all because she's saying, F the big banks. The students should not have to pay to bail out these banks. We need to bail out our students. And so we need to get behind fights like that. And we need to be able to go out and march and really fight for the things that are in our interests. At the same time, if I were to go talk to Congressman X and say, you know what, Congressman, what you're teaching in high school around sex education is irrelevant. Young girls are having a lot of sex in high school. You need to get with the program, and you need to really teach them another kind of education besides just don't do it. You know what they would say? They would laugh, because they're not interested. Their frame of view is like this. And this is the same thing with marriage equity. Do we really, as queer folks, is marriage equity really going to solve our problems? No. You know how many queer kids are growing up wanting to commit suicide? The fact that we live in a world where heteronormativity is ingrained in everything we see. Look at analyze TV from the moment you grow up. That is what we're up against. And marriage is just one little sliver. So when you're dealing in the space of politics, you have to remember the imagination of these congresspeople that are making decisions about you is like this. And we can't just limit ourselves to that. This is why we need to also work in the space of ideas. And we need to completely challenge the system from the inside out. In other words, we need to be able to say, you know what, in 10, 20 years, we're going to have a world that's gender-free. We're going to have a world in which borders no longer exist. Because in reality, borders are becoming outdated. We're in a globalized world. I guarantee you that in 50 years, we're going to have to rethink what it means to be a country with borders, because you just can't stop the flow of humans. I mean, have you seen what's happening in Europe? Have you seen how they are, like, there's migrants coming from Africa, from India, and they are literally coming in boats by 100, 300. You're not going to stop that. What are you going to do, let them die in the sea? They're letting that happen, but it won't stop. The other day, actually, I think there was a film shot of migrants just rushing to the fences and climbing it over. And there were so many migrants that climbed the fence and crossed that border that there was inability to control. So at the end of the day, borders are not going to hold people back. I mean, the Berlin Wall fell, the Great Wall of China fell. There's no wall in human history that has stopped the flow of people. And so we need to think, is borders, are they really going to work? Or do we need to imagine something different? And as an artist, I think also, you know, when you tell someone, oh, come join my struggle, right? You're like, hey, let's go do a march, let's go do a rally, because you've got to be down with the struggle. Well, you know what? Most people actually don't want to struggle. And we need to stop always talking about what we do in a negative frame and saying no to this, no to that law, no to that law, no to this law. We have to say, yes, what are we about? What kind of world do you imagine? Because often in the social justice space, we get stuck in what we're against, and we don't have a language to define what we're for. And this catches us because you know what this is? This becomes internalized oppression, where you're so stuck in what your oppressor tells you. You're stuck. You're like, I'm only a woman of color. I'm only a feminist. The most powerful thing you can do is you can say, I'm a human being, and I will go beyond your gender. I will go beyond what you call race, and I will be a human being that's going to help other human beings. You know, imagine if we were to get beyond our own internalized racism. But this is what happens in the space of ideas. This is why all of you creative people, we need music, we need novels, we need romance, we need things that reflect our values, because ain't nobody trying to listen to like a 10-point political program. It's just not, it's not what speaks to people in their hearts. And I think, you know, I love being an artist because I can say some really crazy, you know, outrageous things that people are like, oh, she's just an artist. But I'm really trying to say, no, actually, in the space of action is the space of reform. We need to reform laws, yes. Are we going to pull all those congressmen out of there? Probably not for another 2 or 3 decades. But ideas is a space of revolution. That's where you truly liberate the mind. So you need to work in both. I'm not saying not to work in action, I'm saying you need to work in both. Now, how does this matter when it comes to laws? Well, that politician right there is a key decision maker. President Obama, the most powerful man in the world. So yeah, they'll say, let's call President Obama, let's call Speaker Boehner, let's make sure he passes immigration reform, etc., go do office visits. That's on the left. That's action. Of course, there's big money. You can't do anything about big money. Big money exists in politics. Unfortunately, that's it's an ugly reality, but that's a reality. And then there's a space of culture, which is what happens when we begin to put out really revolutionary ideas, and then you have that right-wing congressman's son saying, hey dad, you know what, your anti-immigrant stuff, that's just not cool anymore. You know what I mean? Have you seen how some of these right-wingers' kids are coming out of the closet as queer? And the right-wingers are like, you know, this is what culture means, that we can change people's ideas. We can impact through culture. It's not just about knocking on their door or go visiting them. We have to be able to change culture. If you don't change culture, then you can't change politics. And the anti-immigrants knew this very well. The first cultural war they had was a war on hate. They began to dehumanize migrants so that voters could say, yeah, get those people out of there. You know what, in reality, I think that we need to stop for a second and acknowledge that if it wasn't for migrant labor, people can't get their 99-cent cheeseburgers or their 99-cent McDonald's salad because migrants are picking your food, they're killing the cows, they're in the slaughterhouses. Majority of slaughterhouse workers are migrants. The majority of workers you see in the restaurant, just go to the back, are migrants. We're literally feeding this country, we're taking care of the kids, and yet we can't even ask for basic worker rights, you know, and these are our families, and we're trying to demand, hey, you know what, we're asking you to treat us like human beings. But the mindset is so backwards that Americans can't see, they can't see it. They can't see, I mean, I'm serious, you go to any restaurant, it's not, you don't be blinded, you know who's working in the back, you know who's making your food. Why can't we translate that into real human rights and say, just on that reason alone, we need to understand that migrants are a vital part of how this country works. And not just that, but some of you are just 3 generations removed from being migrants. You know what I mean? You know when they say, oh, well, you know, these Mexicans, they don't belong here. Well, actually, this land, the Mexicans are in more closer proximity than some of your European ancestors. And when the Irish came, the Germans, they were all migrants. And you know, they came for the exact same condition. They came escaping persecution. They came for opportunity, but they were called settlers. That was the code of settlers, right? Because when white European comes, they come to settle. They come to build their colonies. But when Latinos come, or when Africans come, or when Asians come, we're outsiders. And yet, who built the railroads? You know, so let's begin to really understand here that the division of migrants in reality is a false perception. Because the United States is predominantly a country made up on migrants. You just look at what the Statue of Liberty said, give me your tire, give me your poor. We don't have to go that far back. But this is the memory, sometimes there's a historical memory loss. And what I hope that you all do is you go back and talk to your families, especially if, talk to your parents. How many generations ago did their ancestors come? And what kind of persecution did they face? And what kind of human rights would they have wanted for those before them? And how do you carry that over based on values? It's not even about, hey, legalize this, legalize that. You say, how would you like to have been treated? How do you want your human rights protected? And that's what we have to do for people today. I just want to point out here, also, I'm a little older. When I was in 2006, I remember one of the largest immigrant rights marches ever in the history of time. You guys remember that? 2006? Okay, so I remember at that time, I'm a hardcore, anti-capitalist, hardcore, I know my Black history, I know my Chicago Power history, my Native American history. I really understand that this country has been built on genocide, on slavery, on the backs of migrants. So when I would go to the marches and I'd be like, man, everyone's carrying American flags and everyone's dressed in white. And I was like, why do we have to appease by being non-threatening? And why do we have to buy into this patriotic BS? Because you know what we were saying at the time, our movement was saying is, oh, we're the good migrants. Because you know what, those Arab migrants, they're the bad ones. They're gonna blow up your building. And that's division. We began to cause division by having this good migrant, bad migrant narrative. The other thing we would say is, we're not lawbreakers. Oh, well, you know what? The United States has a war on poor Black people, and they call them criminals too. So we can't go on this frame that says we're not breaking the law. In reality, the laws are unjust. They need to be broken. We need to completely destroy some of these laws. But it was just not working, okay? It just wasn't working. There was no immigration reform. 2007, people were like, we're close, we're close. No, didn't happen. And then in 2010, something really important happened, which is that undocumented youth in different parts of the country, many of whom are here tonight, woohoo! Yeah! So undocumented youth began to say, you know what, we don't need you to talk for us in DC. In fact, you're messing things up. You're not actually winning us anything, and you're enriching yourself because you keep getting all these nonprofit dollars to supposedly represent us, and we're going to come out with our stories. Very much inspired by Harvey Milk. You know Harvey Milk? What he said is, we are gay, we're queer, we need to come out. Not until, 100 years ago, it was sometimes illegal in some states to be out. Can you believe that? So when Harvey Milk inspired people and said, you need to come out with your story, you need to share. Because when they see that we're their brothers, their sisters, their friends, their neighbors, we will begin to be humanized. And that's the same tactic that undocumented youth use, and I think it was a really brilliant move. As an artist, I would be like, yo, this is performance theater. But they would dress in caps and gowns, and they would go. It's funny because sometimes I'm like, I don't even know who my senator is, my House of Representatives. I'm just like, okay, I don't trust the laws in the United States. But I was so impressed that so many undocumented youth would have their list of targets, and they'd be like, we're going to do a sit-in in McCain's office, we're going to do a sit-in, in Senator so-and-so's office, and they created a moral crisis. Because what happens? They would say, Senator X, who are you calling illegal? Because the person you're calling illegal is me. And I am a young person, I want to go to school, I have a family, and they began to shift morality. You understand? They began to create a crisis for those who were using the word illegal. And you would not have been able to have that were it not for people to come out. This is why it's so important for people to come out with their stories, because you make it harder for your enemy to oppress you and to dehumanize you. And within 2 years, you had a shift in public opinion, okay? A major shift. If you look at some of the polling prior to when undocumented youth began to come out, the DREAM Act got introduced in 2001, okay? So 2010, it had already been 10 years, and national polling was like, maybe. By the end of 2012, Obama for America came out in support of the DREAM Act. They basically said, we need a piece of legislation. Unfortunately, it failed because, again, these Democrats and Republicans, they are playing football with the lives of our families, and they didn't pass anything. But the pressure to do something was so great that the president had to pass DACA. And this is a significant lesson for all of us, is that you can create a moral crisis so strong that you force the hand of the most powerful man in the world to do something. And even though it wasn't legalization, and I'll be clear on that, because some people think, oh, the DREAM Act passed. No, it did not pass. It's actually a temporary worker permit, and it's a temporary relief of deportations, but it's not something that is how do you say it? It's not permanent. But that happened, and I was so inspired because, you know, like as a woman of color and as someone who witnesses how we're dehumanized, our communities are dehumanized, and that fundamentally there is structural racism working so that there is voices that are heard and voices that aren't heard. I was so inspired. This is one of the art pieces that I did, but it was a game-changing moment, and I realized the power of culture, the power of art, because I think, you know, that some of these actions, I mean, I would see coming out rallies. There was coming out rallies in Chicago, here in LA. I know there was groups like Dreamers Adrift, which Fernando's here. They were started making videos about what it meant to be undocumented. All of a sudden on YouTube, you began having people come out. It was a cultural moment that began growing and growing, and you could no longer stop it. And, you know, it was something I was tremendously inspired by, as many others. And it really, you know, it affected the art that I did. This piece, No Human Being is Illegal. I mean, also, the way that we use the word illegal is very racialized, because there is some greedy bankers that ripped off all of your families, all of people living in this country. Greedy bankers that have not been incarcerated yet, and yet they're not called illegal bankers. Or people like Madoff, who ripped off the pensions of hundreds of thousands of families. He's not called an illegal investor. You understand? So the word illegal is a very racialized term, especially when you use the word alien. And it's really meant to talk about a very particular kind of brown person, and to kind of give you the idea that all migrants are Mexicans. Well, in reality, the second largest group of migrants are Filipinos. We have African migrants, we have migrants from Serbia, we have migrants from all parts of the world, so we need to move away from the ghetto in our mind that says that migrants are only brown, because it's not true. So this is the piece that I created. Why did I create this? Well, if you remember the space of action and the space of ideas, I was noticing that we were constantly reacting to bad frames. So in other words, we were constantly saying, no, we're not that. We're not that. And we would say no SB 1070, no HB 56, and we would always be in the no. And frankly, it's because there is a war on migrant communities, and so, you know, the war is so strong that you only have time to defend yourself. But at some point, we need to say, well, there's also a war on our imagination, because imagine the level of trauma that children have who their parents are undocumented, or who their sisters are undocumented, and all they see is negative messages about their family. That affects your own sense of self and your self-esteem. The other thing is, you know, if you really think about it, you know, many of my family members, they came from Peru, so they came on a plane, and then some of my family members are Mexican, and they came through the border. But the amount, imagine if one day you realize, I can't survive here anymore, and I need to go on a journey, and I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, and I may never see them again. I may not see them for 20 or 25 years. And I'm going to leave my lover, I'm going to leave my mother, and my father. And even though they're old and frail, and even though my girlfriend might be expecting a baby, I'm going to leave, because it's the only thing I can do. And I'm going to get on a train for 57 days, knowing there's narcos on the way, knowing I'm probably going to get humiliated by the Mexican police. If I'm a woman, 70% likelihood that I get raped, and not once or twice, multiple times, or I might die in the desert. So do you imagine the amount of courage it takes to make a decision like that, and to really subject yourself through that, because you're so focused on your single goal? That is the ultimate test of human dignity. The ultimate symbol of human survival is the migrant. And the migrant will go through hell and back in order to reach their destination. And I think we don't remember that, we don't honor that. We somehow think that migrants magically appear at the border, and they just, you know, and then you like say, oh, you magically appeared, you're a criminal. And I'm just saying, you need to show the migrant some respect. The migrant has just done something that most people can probably never do. They would be too scared. Some migrants show up here with limbs missing. Some migrants people watch them die and they keep going on their journey. And that to me is the ultimate symbol of human resilience. And I really wanted to celebrate that because even myself, I mean, I'm college educated, my mom wasn't college educated, my mom struggled so much. And her story is a beautiful story that she decided to leave everything. My mom didn't go back home for 25 years. She had to go back because her mother was dying. And that's, you know what I mean? And like, I couldn't do that. And so for me, migration is a beautiful act of love. It's an act of resilience, and it's an act ultimately of human survival. And funny that Jeb Bush actually just said that. He actually said migration is an act of love, which is really funny. But and I think you know, it's interesting because a lot of activists would say, oh, that's cheesy, that's not true. But in reality, we've been migrating since the beginning of time. I mean, our ancestors migrated from Africa. Like, people have been moving for a long time. So we have to sometimes go back to the basics and remember that fundamentally we all have the right to move. There was a great migration of African Americans from the south to the north. Movement is a part of our history, and I wanted to really honor that. And I wanted to use the monarch butterfly, and it was being used in different parts by different artists. And I thought this is a perfect symbol because it's the monarch butterfly actually crosses borders. And yet when we think of butterflies, we're like, oh, the butterflies, they're coming. Let's let's set up our butterfly camps and our like butterfly watch days. And imagine if we could do the same for migrants and say like, oh, you know what? Let's celebrate those migrants who come. Let's build a freaking statue at the border because if it weren't for them crossing, I can assure you would not be paying $2.99 for your lettuce. You know, and so we need to show some gratitude as well. And so I began to do costumes, and the other thing is I think sometimes in our movement we just forget to have fun. We're just all about fight, struggle. And honestly, people ain't trying to struggle. I mean, I'm serious. You're gonna tell a mom who has 3 kids, hey, come join the struggle. She's gonna be like, I don't want my kids to struggle. Like, no. It's just not, I don't know why we keep using that phrase. We need to have fun. We need to just be like proud. And I like to make costumes. I thought that was, you know, I was like, let's wear wings. I did a lot of street art with the butterfly. This was in Charlotte in 2012. And then I began to work with different artists and musicians. Pearl Jam, R.E.M., The Roots, Shepard Fairey, Russell Simmons, and we asked them to share the butterfly. So, interestingly, you know, a lot of artists, they're also like, yo, I want to show some positive stuff. Like, is The Roots going to tell their fans, call Boehner? No, ain't nobody. Can you make a call to President Obama and tell him to blah, blah? No, that's so boring. You know what I mean? And yet, so many organizations do that. But the bands, they were like, yo, we want to give our fans fun stuff to do. I mean, our fans, like, when they listen to our music, think about when you listen to your favorite musician. Are you thinking about the rally or no, you're thinking about, I'm grooving to this. This is my shit right here, you know? And imagine if they were to say one day, you know what? We need to have reform. And you need to share this butterfly. It was a really powerful moment, actually, and you know, there were Juno Diaz, shared it, a bunch of folks. That's the work I do too, is that I work with artists, because artists are really exploited in the social justice space. People are always like, yo, can you make me a free video? Can you make me a free poster? Can you get your band friends to come perform for free? And I think that's a mistake, because in reality, just like, you know how I showed you the space of ideas, we need artists to be creating revolutionary work. And you need to just let them go do their work. Don't be like, oh, if you don't come to the march, you're a sellout. Let the filmmakers make their films, let the comic book artists make comics, because we need more of that. We need pop culture reflecting our ideas. And, you know, musicians all the time feel exploited because they're just being asked to do something transactional instead of being like, yo, you know what? You have a fan base, how can we educate your fan base? Let's make it about you. How you reach your fans instead of making it about doing something for free. This is something in Philadelphia where the group I work with, Culture Strike, and my friend Julio Salgado and I, we created, he's an undocumented artist, an amazing artist. We created a whole stencil kit, and we're like, you know what, we want people to do art in their cities for a march. And we created this how-to video, and he was like, I'm Julio, and I was like, I'm Fabiana, this is how you make a stencil, this is how you put it up, super basic. But we were trying to show, like, you know, everyday folks how to make art, and then different cities made art. This is in Philadelphia. And the moms were gangster. I mean, I'm gonna show you what they did. was like, yeah, this is what happens when you allow people to be artists and creative, is that they open up to all these ideas. This piece, immigration reform, is central to women's equality. So 3/4 are migrants, 3/4 of migrants are women and children. Okay, 3/4. And because of what you see on TV, I'm sure when you think of migrants, you think of men. You probably think of men who are maybe waiting for work. That's probably what comes up in your mind. In reality, the majority of migrants are women and their kids. And so if we're feminists, and if we're really about women's power, then we need to understand migration is a feminist issue. That these women, you know that women can't get their immigration status sometimes unless they're married? So in other words, unless they have a man to apply for them, it's a lot harder. And also, not just that, if you look at how many women are raped in detention centers or abused, it's out of control. And so even on the feminist tip alone, we need to stand up for migrant women because it's an issue of women's equality. I did this poster, and these were some of the women in DC who held it up, and they were using it to kind of expand their message. I collaborate a lot with different groups, and they use my art. It's one of the funnest things I do is to be able to see my art in real action. And finally, I'm going to just close it out by speaking a little bit more on the issue of women, because I think that migration is not an issue here, and feminism is not an issue here. These issues are intersected, just like the issue of being queer is intersected with an issue of being a migrant. So number one, do you know why many women migrate? It's because they don't have opportunities in their home country. And because in places like Peru, where my mom was from, in order to apply for a job, you have to submit your photo. And you have to weigh a certain amount, and you have to be a certain amount of age. And in places like Peru, and even still to this day in Mexico, the opportunities that you have after 30, unless you're married, it's economically impossible. Okay, so the patriarchy is very much linked to migration because women have to migrate. Women are the majority of migrants, and we migrate because we still live in a patriarchal world. And this piece, women pay the price for the decisions made by men. You don't have to go too far, you just have to go to the US Congress. Last year, 2013, over 400 laws restricting a woman's right to abortion introduced, and over 200 passed. Okay, it's been 40 years since Roe versus Wade, and yet we have over 200 laws passed restricting our right to birth control, restricting our right to abortion. And fundamental to this is the idea that women's bodies need to be policed and that women's sexuality needs to be controlled. And so, just like when we think about migrants, you know what the bottom issue around migration is that this country and the big corporate America needs a subhuman working class that they can exploit. And how do you have that? Well, you have migration. How do you make, migrants are having to leave because there's no opportunities for them in their home country. Why is it that we exist in a culture where women are slut-shamed, where rape culture is the norm? You know, we live in a culture that Bell Hooks calls the phallic imaginary. And that is that we live in a penis-centered culture. I'm serious. Look at the films. Look at all these scandal, all these things, all about men's pleasure. Women are usually kind of secondary protagonists. If you go out and you just study the ads, women are like this. They're like, looking all like we're defensive, we're passive, we don't do anything except look pretty, right? That's what you see. And yet, who's making all the decisions? If you go look at the advertising, the men, they're holding the bottle, they're on the computer, they're signing something, they're the active ones. And women, we're just pretty little trophy things that are there to appease your visuals. And so I fight against this because I also believe this is the piece that I did. I think that we need to completely move towards I think that we need to seriously dismantle patriarchy. And the way that I do that is that I challenge the very ways in which women are unequal. So there's 120 ways to call women sluts. And there is 20 ways to call men, about 20. And when men get called sluts, it's a positive thing, like high five, bro. You're getting laid, you're experienced, you're building experience. It's a positive thing. Women have to exist in the dichotomy of virgin and whore, right? And so if you have too much sex, you're gonna get over to the slut area. You know what I mean? And in reality, what is a slut? I mean, is it what's the magic number? Is there a magic number? And that matter. And also, like, who is teaching us to have agency over our body? Because I'll give you a simple example. When you're learning sex ed, right, when you were young, boys have wet dreams. Okay, you know wet dreams is in a pleasure context, right? Because a wet dream, you're like, okay, the boy's having something positive, he's having a wet dream. What's the equivalent of a wet dream for young girls? That they feel good. See, none of you guys learned it because you know what? We didn't get that language in high school because it wasn't about our pleasure. Because we're only here to make babies. So, therefore, no one's going to teach you how to pleasure yourself. No one's going to teach you, you know what? This is how you learn to negotiate what you like. There was a study that just came out that said young women are having more sex than ever before and they're not enjoying it. Okay, so this is just how far over we are into the culture of patriarchy. And it's the same thing with immigration. We are so far over into the lens of criminality that we need to shift it over. This is why I say we need to be having art that says, F the borders. Your borders are outdated. Your borders are just, they don't work anymore. And it's the same thing. This is why we need to have an engagement of pussy power. We need to say, we're not down with your rape culture, y'all. We're about loving ourselves. We're about, you know, the other day I asked young people, I was like, hey guys, everyone knows how to draw a little penis, right? But do they know how to draw a vagina? Do we get encouraged to look at I'm serious, do we get encouraged to look at ourselves and love our bodies and be like, yo, I'm gonna protect this body, I'm gonna have agency? No. Because we live in a culture that teaches you how to shame your body and then somehow you have to, you shouldn't have the tools to negotiate for it. And I want to challenge that with my art. And I want to be able to say, stop rape culture, stop slut shaming. That is not acceptable, not in the kind of contemporary society we live in today. And finally, I'll close it out with this, which is that I was very inspired by the movement of young people coming out. When I was 19 years old, I had an abortion, and I share that with you because we need to come out. We need to come out. There's 1 in 3 women in this country who has an abortion. And we live in a culture of stigma and shame to the point that we don't talk about it. Even among our girlfriends, we don't talk about it. And that's how much we've been encouraged to be silent. What happens when you're silent? People are going to come make laws about you. Just like they did when undocumented folks were not coming out, it gives them reason to oppress you, to take away your own ability to have agency over how laws are governing your body. And so I wanted to show this because we need to also do the same. As women, we need to have our coming out ceremonies where we come out and we're like, I've had an abortion and I have no more shame. And we've got to stop the amount of bashing that happens. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you can go up to the microphone and direct your questions to Fabiana. And yeah, feel comfortable to do that.
Wait. Don't be shy. More comments? You learned something new? How you feeling? Yeah, just share. Okay, Javier.
Hello everyone, my name is Javier Hernandez. I'm from Pomona. I've been doing a lot of work within the human rights movement. Working with Fabiana in the past, we had a wonderful event in Denver. And one of the things, when we talk about art, and I was one of those critics. Most of the time I was like, oh my god, like, what's the importance of art? But we knew that there was an importance, but I didn't really understand what it was. And so, I want to thank Fabiana for the work that she's done, and also I know that there's other work that has been done with an empowering, like, undocumented artists, and I think I would like maybe for you to share a little bit about that, just so people people know that there's a lot more artists out there that are also doing the work. And yeah, and also for like, for the youth here in the area, there are spaces, the Illinois Parent Youth Coalition, we've been organizing since 2010. We're going through the slides and everyone was sharing her story. One of the things that I wanted to do was, acknowledge a few folks in the room, if you don't mind, Maria. Just like people like Maria, which I don't know where she's at, Maria Rodriguez, I think she walked out, but she goes to Pittsburgh. But Maria has been arrested twice, I believe, fighting for immigrants, and she's undocumented herself. We have DNA here. The U-locks for your bike, they U-locked themselves to a fence at a detention center to stop deportation for one day, and they were there for like 3 or 4 hours, with their necks. And I think it's important to also acknowledge, we have a lot of leadership here in the area, and we're always looking to work with organizations here on campus, but reaching out to us as well would be awesome from your part.
Well, thank you. What's your website for IYC? The IYC.org. Okay. So yes. The little dirty secret about the art world is that 93.5% of museum curators are white. 9 out of 10 critics are white. The art world, I think, is like a space of cultural apartheid. Like on the real, if you're a person of color, very little opportunities because your art gets seen as, oh, that's political art, that's Latino art, and it gets down on. So already there's a big crisis with artists of color. But if you're undocumented, you face even more hurdles, of course, because at least as an artist, if you're born here, you can apply to an arts grant. But if you don't have a social security number, then how are you going to apply to that arts grant? Not to mention that the whole kind of educational movement around undocumented students has been math and science, right? So it's not like, I feel like this is where the rhetoric really hurts us, where they're like, oh yeah, we need more scientists, we need more engineers, we need more mathematicians. It's not like they're saying, oh, we need more undocumented comedians, we need more undocumented filmmakers, artists. That's not seen as valuable. It's only seen as, well, what is a real career, right? Math and science. So as a result, there's a lot of very talented undocumented artists that have not always been able to really share their work. And as a woman of color, I completely understand this. There's a lot of hurdles. And so the organization that I helped start, Culture Strike, we specifically are developing programs for undocumented youth artists. And artists overall, and actually there's been a really amazing work done already. Julio Salgado, I encourage you to check out his work. I mean, he's doing a lot of stuff on queer issues. Fernando is part of Dreamers Adrift. If you look at Dreamers Adrift on YouTube, you're gonna find some amazing comedy there, videos about real life. I mean, even Inocente, Inocente, the documentary. Inocente is a young artist. Her film got nominated, I think, for an Oscar. And she is an undocumented artist. She's also homeless. Let's see. Anybody? Yosimar. Oh, a poet. Yosimar Reyes. You gotta look him up. Super amazing. He's also a docu-queer. And then Felipe Baeza. You can find all of them actually on my Facebook. I constantly share about them. But if you know an undocumented artist, please connect them because we're having trainings for folks. We're having camps. Trying to figure out how to really lift up those stories. Yes, in the back.
By the way, that was amazing. Just personally, I was down for all of that. However, one thing I really wanted to know, I thought that was really interesting about your rock, how often when you're making a lot of noise about political noise, people believe, oh, she's an artist, like she's a little artist, which I found very infantilizing. How do you navigate that, or how do you know how other artists navigate that, being that you are doing such politically charged work?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is also why I work in the social justice space, and I have to always tell them, look, you have to value artists, you have to respect artists, because we're not just the cute thing. We're not just something that you can, oh, that's cute. We actually, there's a lot of power to our work, and at the same time, I can have a Pussy Power poster, and it's totally okay. Do you know what would happen if see for our poster? I can guarantee the Republicans will go after them so strong they will get their funding cut. That's how crazy of a society we live in. So artists can do things that organizations can't. And I try to explain this to bookmakers because I'm like, this is why we need to have a partnership. Artists thrive in the space of ideas. We can do like some Dungeons and Dragons thing that has to do with economic inequality. Very different than what you're going to do with your, report, which is important, but it's kind of boring. So just I have to constantly remind people that they need to respect artists, they need to pay artists, and I'm always like, if you pay artists, don't be trying to get stuff for free, because artists work, it's crazy, like people see me, they're like, oh, you're just an artist, I'm a worker. We're also an exploited base. We don't have a union speaking out for us, and so we need to organize as artists and be like, yo, these are minimum, this is how much you pay, and advocate for our workers' rights. And then in the art space, people are, it's funny, it's like two worlds. In the art space, they're like, oh, that's that political thing that you're doing. And I'm like, y'all, I'm sorry, but all of us are paying for the banker's bill. All of us are getting, all of you are getting affected by the student interest rate on your loans. So we can't just be disconnected. Artists are not disconnected from their communities. Artists are a part of their communities, and we reflect that. So it's almost like being able to pull both worlds and be like, look, you guys need to learn from each other.
Thank you.
One more question or closing comment? Okay. Oh, what? There we go. Yay. Okay, fine.
So I come from like an immigrant family as well, and I feel like especially in the Asian community, there's a lot of like internalized racism against other immigrant groups. So I was wondering if you could like speak into that and like what networks together.
Yeah, internalized racism against other groups, and even among immigrants. Yeah, so this is the other thing. I think being an immigrant or an immigrant family is also not perfect. There's definitely a lot of self-hate. I mean, even in my immigrant family, my grandmother is an African Peruvian, and my mom and my dad would say, don't hang out with black people because they're dangerous. And I was like, what's going on? I mean, like, we obviously, you're having some self-hate issues going on here. Or they would be like, we're Peruvian, we're not like those Mexicans. And yet, no one comes up to us and is like, oh, actually, are you Peruvian? Because I'll treat you a little better if you're that kind of Latina. So I just think it's internalized racism in the sense, there's four kinds of racism. There's institutional racism, structural racism, interpersonal racism, which is what we play out, and this is also in, interpersonal racism and internalized racism. So internalized and interpersonal are things that we do to each other. So for example, my mom, she would tell me, hey, be sure to date a light-skinned dude because you're gonna mejorar la raza. You know what that means? He said you gotta improve the race. That is some racist ass thing to say. To say very light-skinned people so that you can improve our complexion. And yet that happens all the time. Things like that, or you know what? Or they would be like, oh, my brother's a little darker than me, they would be like, oh, they would call Sambito. Things like this happen, and I think also as migrants or people who grew up, we need to call this stuff out, and we need to also be able to have an honest conversation about all the baggage that our families bring from their home countries, and they try to enforce on us. I mean, it's not just around race, it's around virginity. My cousins who came from Peru, their dad would never let them go out with boys ever, and as soon as my cousin went on her first date, bam, she got pregnant. Latinas still have the highest teenage pregnancy rate. You know why? It's because our families don't like to talk about sex. And you know why? It's because of that Catholic internalized guilt. So I think we need to also be self-critical and be able to have these honest conversations around how colonialism, internalized racism actually works completely against us, and not just think that, oh, just because we're migrants or people of color, we somehow give ourselves permission to not have the real healing conversations. It's the same thing within the Asian communities. I mean, Southeast Cambodians are looked down upon because they're the darkest, they're considered on the lower rung. And so, just a Latino thing. Cool. So with that, you want to close it?
Yeah, we've been clapping a lot, but let's give one more huge round of applause. Especially to the members of the community who came out. That means a lot. And to welcome you all to join us in about 10 minutes, we're going to start the student discussion, which it's student-led, but welcome to all. And upstairs in room SEC 217, and also Fabiana is going to be selling her posters after this. Next week, the PSU's great debate on the future of the Republican Party. You should show up for that. Thanks. Good night.